If you want to feel more calm, confident, and connected in your life, the Love Your Real Life membership is for you. Members love the simple daily challenges that help create small, consistent actions that lead to the change that they want. And then the live sessions that are throughout the month that leave them feeling grounded, relaxed, and supported. There's a link in the show notes to join. I would love to see you inside of this membership. Welcome to the Love Your Real Life podcast. I'm Faith Lauterbach, and this is a space to help you heal, rebuild, and create a life you truly love, even if it looks different than you imagined. Each week, I'll be sharing tools, encouragement, and real conversations about what it means to move forward after betrayal, heartbreak, or simply life not going as planned. I am honored to walk alongside you and help you love your real life. Hello and welcome. Today's episode is one that I am so excited about. I'm going to be joined by Monica Packer from About Progress. And honestly, this conversation felt like such a natural fit because so much of the work that she does overlaps with what I believe about health, wellness, and creating a life that actually supports you. If you're not familiar with Monica, you're about to be. She is amazing. And she's the host of the About Progress podcast, where she helps women take messy, imperfect action in their lives instead of waiting for perfection. And I have personally learned so much from her work over the years. I've been part of her supporters club, and her approach to habits, growth, and realistic self-development has genuinely impacted the way I think about my routines, consistency, and how I show up for myself. One of the things I admire most about Monica is that her work feels very compassionate and very real. It's not about doing everything perfectly. It's not about becoming a different person overnight. It's about creating sustainable change in a way that actually works in real life, especially for women who are already carrying so much. And I think that's why this conversation felt so aligned with what we talk about here on the podcast. So today we are talking about why traditional habit advice often fails for women, why self-care can feel impossible in busy seasons of life, redefining consistency, and how to create habits that actually stick without approaching your life from burnout, shame, or perfectionism. We also talk about Monica's upcoming book, Sticky Habits, which I already pre-ordered and am so excited about. This conversation felt encouraging, practical, and honestly really freeing. I took lots of notes as I was interviewing her because there's just so much great information that she's sharing. There's going to be some links in the show notes about how you can learn more about Monica, pre-order her book, and all sorts of things. So let's get into it. All right, Monica, I'm so excited to have you here. For listeners who may not know you yet, can you share a little bit about who you are and the work that you do with About Progress?
Sure. I'll just begin a little personally. I'm a mom of 5 living in Salt Lake area. We lived in the Bay Area for a long time and have moved here during COVID. And now we're like here to stay. Our kids are at that age where like it would be traumatizing for them to move. So we're here and we're loving it. They're learning how to ski and all that good stuff. Professionally, most people know me as a podcaster at About Progress. And my whole podcast there is for a community of women who are wanting to make progress outside of the perfectionism cycle, which is how my whole work began because of my own personal pursuit to do that myself. And it gradually became a community and has totally changed my life. And I'm not just talking about the community, like it would have changed my life even to shift where I was getting my value and what mattered to me and making space for myself in my life. So, and that's kind of the nutshell of who I am and what I do.
I love it. Well, one thing that I really love about your work is how realistic and compassionate it feels. What originally led you to shift from that perfectionism to progress?
So this goes back to before the community, before the podcast started, I had my own rock bottom moment as I was approaching my 30th birthday, where I realized that I was stuck on the sidelines of my own life. I had this, long and full list of responsibilities and ways that I was trying to measure up and fulfill my duties and live a good life, but my life didn't feel like my own. It was a life I wanted, but it didn't feel like mine. Um, and I was really stuck in the cycle of just waiting, waiting for a different time or different opportunities, waiting for skills, waiting for money, waiting for confidence, waiting for even the certainty of having an outcome that I wanted. And I was very fortunate to get a great therapist who pointed out to me that I was a perfectionist, which I would not have described myself as one at the time at all. I thought I was a non starter, a non finisher. Like I was just someone who didn't do things besides, like, I was a middle school teacher and then a stay at home mom, so doing my responsibilities, I could do those. But she pointed out this lifelong cycle that I was stuck in of all or nothing. And my cycle is a little bit different than most in terms of the first 20 years of my life were the all or nothing cycle. Like I was a full blown overachieving perfectionist, very matching the stereotype that is out there. I was aspiring to be a perfectionist. I don't think you can get more perfectionistic than that, than like aspiring to be a perfectionist. And I crashed and burned as a 20-year-old with eating disorders and mental health issues and suicidal ideation that then led to the next 10 years where I was in the nothing side of that perfectionism
Mhm.
spectrum. Um, and that began my own curiosity about perfectionism. I've since learned a ton about it, but perfectionism can be a coping mechanism, especially for those who've experienced trauma, but it transcends that particular subset. And also, that subset has the same kind of root, where the root of perfectionism really is a misplacement of identity. It's a misplacement of who we are on our outcomes, whether we have them or we don't. And that, like I said, that played out for me a little bit differently because I think most of us kind of bounce back and forth between the two with a higher frequency. I kind of had a firm bank in one and then a firm bank in the other side of the spectrum because of the high price I had paid for that nothing side, or the all side just kind of led to this massive period of nothing. But most of us kind of bounce between the two. Um, and that milestone for me approaching the 30th birthday was just a moment for me to really take stock of, is this how I want the next 30 years to be? Is this how I want to
Mm.
feel about my life? That things mattered to me, but I never really tried, or that I had longings in my heart I would never justify or make space for. And that's what began what has now become a 10-year experiment on what does it look like to try, but from a different place, a place of knowing who I really am and what matters to me outside of my outcomes. And also, what does it look like to try in a different way where it's not about this hustle or paying the price that also leads to nothing? What if it's about curiosity and compassion? What if it's small wins building over time? What if it's failure is allowed to be part of this process? What if I'm allowed to be mediocre at things and still get great value from it and prioritize it in my life? And both that path is what changed my life of like doing things differently, but also where it came from internally is what changed my life too, of knowing like what actually matters all along is not where I end up. The transformation has lied in the process, not the outcome. So those two things together is what has led to now I would say 10 years of not only progress, but I would say exponential progress than I ever had on that perfectionism spectrum.
There's so many great things that you just said, Monica. I'm definitely taking notes here. Um, I love how you talked about this, like, kind of just life as an experiment, because that leans to so much just curiosity versus it having to look a certain way or, like you said, have
Mhm.
this specific outcome. That's so great. I love how you said that. Um, so was there a specific moment when you realized that the traditional way women are taught habits and self-improvement wasn't actually working for you and probably other women that you saw in your life?
I think as most revelations go, it wasn't a singular moment, it was a series of moments. And that was true for me even as I was approaching my 30th birthday. It wasn't this sudden like eureka moment of being like, everything needs to change and my perfectionism is holding back. And, it was like a series of moments. So those series began actually first with the identity piece to me of recognizing I need to figure out who is Monica outside of her outcomes. Like if I were to remove all of my roles, all of my responsibilities, all my dreams, like who am I actually? Um, and as I explored that, that's what really created a steady foundation on which to then decide all those other things and to pursue them in a different way, like we talked about. And while I was doing that, I was beginning to make steady strides that felt different than I ever had before and was really rewarding and exciting. Um, but then I hit a plateau in my own growth. And I recognized it was because while I knew myself better than I probably ever had in my entire life at that point, for sure, my day to day life was not supporting that self.
Yeah.
And it actually began with recognizing I really needed to work on my sleep. Like I had to change drastically the way I was sleeping. This has been a lifelong issue for me. But it translated to other things too. Like if I know that this part of me really matters, I need to have that actually happening in my life. Like if I know reflection really matters, well, how is that actually going to happen on a day to day basis to support that? If I know things like exploring hobbies and having interests matter to me, then how does my life actually get carved out to match that? And that's what was missing for me. The knowledge was great, but the practicality of it was missing. Um, and this is what began another couple years of experimenting on the habit methods, right, that are out there. Like, how do I actually make my life support what I know matters to me and what I need and want in my life? Um, because what was out there was a lot of good stuff. I mean, really a ton of New York Times bestselling books on habit formation were really big at the time. I read them all. And it was really exciting because I thought, well, maybe I can apply what I've been working on about progress, not perfection in my life to habits. And at first, it involved a lot of failure because even with these methods, I just found that I kept hitting these obstacles. Like I couldn't sustain the habits, even with these most up to date methods that were, again, like really popular and seemed to be very exciting in the field of self help. And since I was already in that place of it's okay to be bad at things, it's okay to fail, I kept trying and failing, trying and failing. But then I started working on this with my clients. In the meantime, I'd become a certified identity and habits coach, but really I was a certified optimized coach. And they do a whole subset on habits. Like that was part of my training. So I thought, well, my clients are having the same issues. They know themselves better, but their day to day lives aren't really allowing for that self to thrive. So we've got to work on habits too. And so I started to use the methods I had learned in my training that came from those best selling books and methods. And they had the same experience. They could maintain some habits with Herculean efforts, but they were paying prices for those efforts in ways that hurt other parts of their lives, from their responsibilities to even their own health, their mental health. Um, or they couldn't sustain them at all. And that's when I had my series of moments that led to like that bigger realization. Maybe it's not us who are broken because all my clients were women. I was a woman. Maybe it's these methods are broken. Maybe they are failing us. And I had to take a real hard look at these methods and really think, well, what about them is true for us as women? And what parts of these methods are not realistic for our lives as women because our lives are different from men's lives. So again, that led to many years of, experimenting and trying things out until I really came to form more of a method that is tailor designed for busy women.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that, and I can relate to, and I'm sure so many people listening to this can relate to all of what you just said. Um, you talk about self-care feeling like a luxury that women can afford,
Mhm. Mhm.
that they can't afford. Why do you think so many women feel that way?
I think there's a lot of crossover here with how the self-care and wellness industries teach about habits in general. And one that it's very perfectionistic bound. To have habits, they have to look the exact same way, be done at the same time of day, day after day after day after day. Like there's little room for nuance or life happening or even periods starting or baseball season. Self-care is a layer of that because self-care is often um, displayed as something that requires time, a great deal of time, money, and energy. And where again these two cross over is I think the ultimate way we actually care for ourselves is through more practical, everyday sort of habits, ones that shouldn't cost as much as we're taught with our time, energy, and money. And a lot of us are waiting for days where we could take care of ourselves, and those days never arrive. I have coached women in their 70s who say
Mhm.
that their lives are so busy and unpredictable that they can't always count on having that time, energy, money bank to actually care for
Yeah.
themselves. So, in many ways, we have to redefine what self care really is. The reason why it costs us too much is just the definition of this kind of more indulgent form of self care, which still matters. We all need girls' nights out or bubble baths. Like a spa date
Mhm.
would be amazing, right? But if that's the only way we measure self care, then we are setting ourselves up to never quite have enough of it. And also, even when we do have those moments, they're like putting band-aids on gaping wounds. They're not meeting more of the everyday basic forms of the ways we care ourselves, which are those kind of boring habits of hygiene and movement and even spirituality. And even just the practicalities of how am I going to feed my family this week and myself, and what needs to get done this week. Um, and so that's a big way of how we are disqualified from it and how we
Mhm.
disqualify ourselves. So if we can start by noting that we can just change what self-care even needs to be fundamentally, that's about deeply caring for ourselves and practically caring for ourselves first before we can do more of the fun or indulgent things. Then we allow us more of the opportunity to one, prioritize it and two, to execute it, to have it.
Yeah. Do you remember when you went through this process with yourself in this beginning stages, was there something that you started with, like your very first thing that you started doing on a regular basis for self-care?
It was sleep.
Sleep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Doesn't sound like
And
self-care, right? It doesn't sound like the way we would define it. But for me, it was
Mhm.
sleep. I've always struggled. I'm the fifth of seven kids. My mom said I was the worst sleeper. She'd always have to drive me around just to take a nap. Or I
Mm.
remember big chunks of my childhood of being up late and waking up really early. And I've been blessed with a couple kids who are like now too. So I'm like, how much of this is genetic? But as an adult, my own sleep patterns were where I was trying. Well, let me paint it this way. Self-care is often it's like we're trying to pour something into an empty well, right? And a lot of times we talk
Yeah.
about like, "Hey, you can't pour from an empty cup," or "You gotta fill your own bucket," like that kind of thing. But the way self-care is often taught, it's like we're pouring things into this well that's empty, but the well's not just empty, there's cracks in it, so it's leaking. And if we don't have those cracks filled, all of those other forms of self-care, maybe the fun ones, the indulgent ones, or even the ones we're just like frantically trying to put together are not going to actually help because things are leaking out. So, sleep
Yeah.
for me was one of those basic forms of like shellacking the cracks in my well, of ensuring that,
Okay.
if my needs are better taken care of, and I'm using the word care very prominently there on purpose, then the forms of caring for myself, from reading to going on a walk or maybe painting my own nails or, doing something fun or a hobby are actually going to help that well rise. So sleep was the first big way. And the way I did that was by experimenting with these methods. And at first I thought, okay, so to work on my sleep, I decide that I'm going to go to bed at this time and wake up at this time.
Mhm.
Did not work. Didn't work. There's a whole lot of things there about it just and this is where we could talk about habit formation, how it needs to be different for women, but It was so reliant on willpower and discipline and on this predictable life that I don't have the luxury of having.
Mhm.
That it wasn't working, and I could talk more about what it eventually did, but that's where I started was sleep.
Yeah. I love that. I love that, like, visualization of the well. I mean, I've definitely heard the fill your own cup, and I've, even used that analogy, but I love that well and that there's cracks in it. That we have to fill those cracks first before we can even put anything in that well that's gonna stay there and mean
Yeah.
anything.
Mhm.
That was great. Thank you so much. Um, I love that you also bring to light this invisible mental load women are carrying
Mhm.
every day, all the time for people who've never really heard that term before. Can you explain that a little bit?
Mhm. So I talked about my series of moments that led to my own eureka, like, oh, women must do habits differently than men. It was noting, okay, what do all of my clients have in common? One, they're very smart, they're very duty led, they're very responsible, and yet these habits aren't sticking. Well, what then do we all have in common? It's that we're women. And I realized that all of the methods we were learning from were written and designed by men. And it's not to knock on these men because there's a lot of good there. And in fact, that's what my method does incorporate, the things that actually can transcend gender. But so much of how these methods are both taught and implemented are based in a reality that we as women don't share. And that's
Mhm.
in large part, I mean, we can talk about hormones alone, but in the largest, like, uniting reason why is invisible labor. We as women carry the high majority of invisible labor. Invisible labor is the often unseen, undervalued or unvalued, underpaid or unpaid labor that is both physical and mental and emotional, required to run institutions from the home to the workplace to the community to the school to the church. It's everywhere. It transcends politics, it transcends religion, demographics. This is a worldwide need. Invisible labor literally runs the world. It makes everything possible. The GDP would come to a screeching halt without this labor. It really, really matters. It's things like childcare. It's things like feeding your family. It's like stocking cleaning products. It's laundry. It's knowing who needs to be where and when. But all of those things are not just these things are perpetual, they're ongoing, and without these things, the world would literally stop, and we know that because it happened in Iceland when one day all the women said, "We're not doing anything today," and everything stopped. Everything, everything, which is so cool. And actually, I would say the New York Times and the, uh gosh, I'm forgetting the word. It's not the World Health Organization, but it's, another big kind of organization like that. They did put a number on it, and they believe it's between 10.7 to $11 trillion a year is the number we could place on invisible labor if it were to actually be paid. But this
Wow.
number is actually based on a $7.25 per hour rate. So even that number is undervaluing the work, okay? So with that all being
Wow.
said, the reason why the methods that we're being given don't work for us is because they are super reliant on willpower. And what's another word for willpower? Energy. Because women
Mhm.
are carrying more of invisible labor. Men do carry some of it, but some is this is not just anecdotal like, oh, I experienced this. This is research backed by decades worth of research. Women do 4 hours to men's 2 hours of care work at home. Anything house related, home care, children, women do 4, it's double the amount of men. That's in America. In India, it's 6 to 1. So it varies the world over, but the disparity is very huge. And that's an average. So
Wow.
that's true for women who don't have children in the home.
Yeah.
That disparity is still there. It's true for those who do, who are working, who are outside of the home or who are working at home as a stay-at-home mom. Okay, so that disparity is huge. We have less time because of invisible labor. We have less energy. We also have less predictability because we have far more interruptions. A lot of invisible labor is urgent in nature, and it's often tied to another person on the other end. So even a task like laundry, like if that buzzer goes off and if you ignore it, the clothes are going to get moldy, the laundry appliance is going to be moldy. So that that interruption is urgent in nature, but often it's attached to a kid or another person. Like, I need something in that laundry. So and so needs something in that laundry. Okay. So even a task like that is often tied to that. So these methods are very reliant. The good men with their great methods is what I call them. They're very reliant on willpower, which we research back have less of because it's energy. That's what willpower is. Okay. It's just a bank. It's an energy bank. And we have a good bank, but it gets withdrawn all day, every day, even mentally. Okay. The other reason why these methods fail us is because they are super reliant on predictability, which
Mm.
again, we have less of. And that also transcends if you're a stay-at-home mom or you have kids in the home or you work outside of the home. That's true for every woman. So the way we can illustrate that is just this idea of consistency. Do you mind if I talk about that a little bit?
No, please. I love it. I love this topic, so please do.
Okay. So a lot of how these methods are taught, and I'm like, as I'm speaking to you, realizing I have something on my shoulder from a child, which is so illustrative of what we're even talking about. But we'll just ignore
Yeah.
that little thing on my shoulder. Um, the way that these methods present habit formation is even if they're like, okay, start with this small habit. They also say, well, what creates the habit? It's consistency. It's doing the habit in the same way at the same time of day, day after day for 21, 28, 30 days. And then you have the habit. Well, what happens if on day 19, a kid gets sick? Or what happens if on day 2, where you don't have the same predictable schedule as you thought you would? So we have to redefine consistency as we're doing habits differently for us. And it's not because we're like less capable. We are every bit as capable. It's because we don't have the same opportunity as men do. Okay. So consistency is doing your best most of the time over time. Your best is not perfect. Your best is truly what you can give, what's reasonable. And I'm just going to say true. Okay. Your best is allowed to change day to day, season to season. Most of the time, your target for consistency is more times than not. So you don't have to hit a perfect 21, 28, 30 days to have a habit. If you're doing it most of the time over time, then you're doing good. And that's the third part. You're playing a bigger picture with habit formation and habits in general. It's less about, did I hit every single square of my habit tracker? And it's more of, over time, am I doing that more than not? Okay. And that's the bigger picture we're playing. And as part of that, though, the best thing about it is we actually can have habits faster than they think when we change what habits can look like too. But I wanted to start
Mm.
first with that whole understanding of why these methods don't work, with invisible labor being the number one reason, and how that translates to the practicalities of implementing habits and how that's best illustrated through that whole consistency idea.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I think that that's so relatable, and I think even just bringing awareness to other people about that feels like such a relief to
Hmm.
know I'm not broken. There's nothing wrong with me. I don't need to be more have more willpower or be more
Yeah.
dedicated. It's about changing the way I am defining consistency and building those habits.
Yeah. And knowing that the whole process doesn't have to look the way I was taught it did, that it's allowed to even look different day to day.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And again, I think that brings us into this baseline and ideal habits. I
Hmm.
remember when I heard you say this in your podcast, I was like, oh my gosh, that is genius. And it's definitely something that I have taken into my own life and used to help clients and people in my membership because it just changes everything. At least for me, it did. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that came to be part of this that you
Hmm.
teach?
This is another layer to the consistency piece. Like, if you want a habit, install it on Monday and do it for 30 days, then you have the habit. Well, the habit itself is most often an ideal, meaning the goal of where you want to end up with the habit. And that's another way we get set up to fail because we as women don't often have ideal days, or at least in that level of consistency that they define it as. Okay. And so, yes, we do need to have ideals. We need to know what we want for our habits to look like, feel like, and function like. So we have those ideals, but we also need another version of our ideals that will create the flexibility we need to be consistent. And that version is called the baseline. Okay, a baseline is the smallest and simplest version of your ideal habit. Now, first, your ideal habit does still need to be designed by you according to like what you actually want and need, not what you think you should want and need, what you want and need, and how you want and need it for this particular season, whether that's literal or figurative. So even the ideal is going to be designed differently than maybe you did it in the past because like even something like exercise, everyone's like can rattle off the ideal. Okay, it's just all in our subconscious. What counts as good exercise? We would all be able to say what that looks like on an ideal, but we don't often make space for a different version of that. Okay. When we don't also make space for like, what is my reality? What would be ideal for my reality and what I actually want and need out of movement? Well, maybe I need to go and punch something hard every day. Okay.
Mhm.
Maybe I need to go and just stretch. Maybe I need to lay on the ground and stretch as my movement or dance, or I go on a quiet walk that's meditative. So you get to design even your ideal differently. It's more about what you
Yeah.
really want and need. Then you take that ideal and you turn it into the smallest and simplest version of that. Maybe for the woman who's like, I need a really meditative, not listening to anything walk most days of the week. I'm going to say 5 days of the week. Well, maybe she knows ideally she wants to do that for 60 minutes,
Mhm.
but she doesn't already walk very consistently, more times than not in terms of that definition. Um,
Mhm.
And so she knows, okay, I need more of a baseline version. What could I do on a day where my energy is really down, or I have way less time, or there's a lot going on with my family, or I'm just not feeling great, or someone else isn't feeling great? Well, on my baseline day, I can go for a 15-minute walk. And people are
Mhm.
going to think, I don't want the 15-minute walk. I want the 60-minute walk. Yes, you do. But I want you to think about how your insistence on perfection is costing you your consistency.
Yeah.
Okay. If the only standard is the ideal, you will fail and
Mhm.
that habit will not stick. But if you have a baseline, then you have the built in flexibility you need to be consistent with your habit. That makes it so that you can be consistent. And also, baselines are amazing because they create momentum. We're often able to do a little bit more than we think naturally, organically, without even having to really think about it. We can go on a 20 or 25-minute walk instead of the 15-minute baseline without even intending to, even on a day where we thought it was a baseline day. But even if not, it's still creating the consistency we need to build and to most importantly, have the support we need from the habit. And that's really another big thing we have to redefine. If we're going to redefine consistency, we also have to redefine what habits are and what they're even for. Habits are the number one way we take care of ourselves. It's the small and consistent ways that we help ourselves feel like we can show up. Habits are supportive. That is
Yeah.
their only job. Their job is to support and serve us, not the other way around. And when you go back to this fundamental idea that habits are helpers, you can design your ideal in a way that actually matches that. And you also can create a baseline that helps you have the support you need.
I love that. I love habits are helpers, and that's such a reminder. It's not something just for us to check off.
Yeah.
It's about helping us live the way we wanna live.
Mm-hmm. And be the person we want to be. Because that really to me is happiness is feeling like yourself.
Exactly.
That's what
I
happiness
love
is
that.
to me. So that's what habits help us do is feel like ourselves so that we can show up to this life that is asking so much of us and that genuinely needs us to be there and to be thriving and to be living a life that is our own.
Yeah. I love that. Thanks, Monica.
Mhm.
Um, so how do we stop approaching habits from the all or nothing mindset? And I'm sure this baseline is part of that, but
Mhm.
any other helpful tips and tricks to do that?
I'm actually going to start deeper with this. And I know
Okay.
you will know from just listening to my work, we always go deep and we go practical,
Yeah.
right? So the deep side here is it takes a tremendous amount of courage to do something differently, especially when it feels like you're cheating. Okay. Or it feels like not the easy way out, but like you're like, yeah, but there's a part of you that probably thinks like, yeah, baselines are just the easy way
Yes.
out. It takes a lot of courage to do this. I had a client early on. I'm in my coaching program. I had a coaching program years ago. It was a group coaching program. And as my first subset of clients, I'll never forget this woman was really struggling with believing the process to real lasting change, which is small wins build over time. That it's not
Mm,
these big swings that create overnight success. It's not this hustle and paying the price that gives you what you want. It's actually building small wins over time and messily so. And she really
mhm,
struggled with believing that because she had had big achievements in her life. She had had areas of her life or moments of her life where the all was working pretty well. And she had to own, but even those outcomes that she got weren't lasting, they weren't sustainable, and that they came at a price that she didn't want to pay anymore. So she
mhm,
had to have this moment of choice where she was like, maybe it is worth trying to do something different. And a couple months later, I think near the end of our program, actually, she was back in the hot seat and we were celebrating the progress she was making and not just awesome progress, like sustainable progress. And we were reflecting on what it was like for her to do things differently. And I asked her, "Well, tell me, like what do you think you could say you learned?" And she said, "I've learned it takes the greatest of courage to do the smallest of things."
wow.
I have a terrible memory. I rarely remember things word for word, and that is something that stuck in my subconscious layers of my brain. It's probably like in my bones, word for word. That's what we
Mhm,
have to embody. If you want to create sustainable habits, you actually have to begin with this courage to dare to believe in a different way and the courage
mhm,
to try. And you can try in the practical ways that we just talked about. Think about what's an area of my life that really matters to me, or even a time of day that's really hard for me that I want to look different. And what's a habit that would support that area of my life or that time of day? And then how can I design an ideal that actually matches me and my season? And then form a baseline and then try it. And like I told you earlier, the great thing about a baseline is you can have a habit day two. You don't have
mhm,
to wait for 30 days of perfection to have a habit. You can have a habit day two. Okay. So
mhm.
try, dare, and take on that courage and try a different way.
Yeah, I love that. So, for someone who feels completely overwhelmed,
Hmm.
life is just coming at them, where would you recommend that they start, like, right now?
Hmm. So I kind of give you a pattern just a moment ago, but I want to go back to that pattern.
Okay.
And I would actually have you start with what is a time of day where you have the most possibility of control?
Mm,
Okay. And this is going to be different for each woman, but a lot of women tend to say morning and or night.
mm,
But there are women who will say mid afternoon or mid morning or like a really random time of day based off of their circumstances, especially those who have teens. I found they're like, actually, like early afternoon is the time of day I can control the best. Within
mhm,
that time, I want you to answer this question. How do you want to feel during that time? We're starting with controllability because overwhelm is that feeling. It's kind
mhm,
of this disparity you get when you feel like you don't have a choice or that nothing you decide or try really matters because so much is just out of your control. So if we can start with a time of day where you'll have the most possibility of control, then we can kind of work backwards to other areas first. Because if we're trying to get you the help you need, we're going to start with what's the time of day that you're going to even have the capacity to be able to give yourself more of that help. And then the feeling part is really important because when you answer that question, how do I want to feel during that time of day? It helps you remove yourself from all of the prescriptions that are just floating around in our minds and in our neighborhoods, you know, about what's good and what counts and what's necessary. You get to actually decide this is how I want to feel during that time. And from there, then you can brainstorm, well, what habits would help me feel those feelings or that feeling? And then you get to decide just one. Okay. So let's
yeah,
let's do an example. Let's say a woman's like, the easiest time I can control is mid-morning. Okay,
mhm,
maybe she has kids and her kids are gone at school and maybe she has a job, but she can start a little bit later or she has this like an hour or two before her work starts or before her work at home starts if she's home.
mhm,
Then she can think about how do I want to feel during that time? Well, maybe she'll say something like, I wanna have fun, like, I wanna just have delight and fun in my life. Maybe she's gonna say, "I want to feel relaxed," or "I wanna feel calm," or maybe I wanna feel clear-headed, I wanna have clarity. Those answers and I would really try to get clear on, like, let's try to get with 1 or 2 that kind of are pretty similar. Narrow it down, and then from there, think of that. So maybe she's like, "I want to have clarity." So much of my overwhelm is just like, there's all these spinning plates and moving parts, I'm just trying to keep up. And if I had some clarity, I would feel more like myself, for starters, and more capable of approaching it. So for clarity, maybe she knows, okay, what would help me feel clarity? Maybe day planning, maybe journaling, maybe meditation, maybe movement, because movement kind of frees her head up from the stress. And then she's going to choose one. Maybe she knows meditating. So she forms then an ideal version and then the baseline version, like we talked about. And then you start with the baseline. So that whole process may have felt really overwhelming. So I'm just going to break it down to you. And your starter step here is to decide, what's the time of day that I can best easily control, and how do I want to feel during that time? Just start there for now and answer those 2
Yeah.
questions.
I love that. I love that so much. And I think it's when you focus on how do you wanna feel, it takes away shoulds, and it
Mhm.
takes away shame, guilt, all of those things. I love that.
And it also can help you
Okay.
choose some shoulds too, Faith, because there are some.
Mm.
I hate day planning. It is a should in my life. I don't love it,
Yeah.
but I can choose it because of how it makes me feel. And I can choose to do it in a way that is realistic for my life and in alignment with my own unique personality and the way I tend to do things. So it helps us choose our shoulds too.
That's true. Yeah. I like that. Well, let's talk a little bit about your book. So excited. I already pre-ordered. I can't wait
Oh, I'd love
to
hearing
read
that.
it.
Yeah.
And so your new book, and we can say the title, right?
Yes, we can. Uh huh.
Okay. Yes, okay, I wanted to make sure. Sticky Habits, and it's coming out later this year.
Yeah.
Um, what inspired you to write this book?
It's everything I just described about my own experimentation on progress outside of perfectionism and how that led to the practical needs of having my life support who I knew I was, and then my work with clients. Honestly, it really is the women. It's that women are the center of my work, really. They're the whole purpose.
Mhm.
They're what drive me, and they also are what inspire me to find different ways. Um, so it was the clients I work with. It's the women.
Yeah, and I love that we're like you talked about, there's a lot of great books out there that,
Yeah.
that have been written by men and from their perspective, and to have someone come in here to hear the voice of a woman and what it's like to actually be a woman and do these things, it's gonna be so amazing, I can't wait.
Oh, thank you.
Um,
I hope I live up to those expectations, but I appreciate that you can see what that purpose is. Yeah.
I definitely can, yeah. What do you hope women feel differently after reading this book?
I hope women feel more confidence in themselves and in their capacity to change. So
Yeah.
much of why habits are difficult is, again, we talked about how these habits are failing us, but we blame ourselves. And when we
Yeah.
have a history of failure, we point to the person we think that is fully responsible to them for them, which is ourselves. And in learning why habits have to be done differently for women and the how to do things differently in a way that is more realistic and also gentle and flexible for us as women, I really hope it grows that confidence in their own capacity, especially to change. And that's what
Yeah.
I see happening, honestly, with my clients. It's not just been about the habits go deeper. It's been far more about the way they see themselves.
Mhm. I will definitely put the in a link in the show notes to pre-order your book. And it comes out
Yeah.
September.
Yeah. September
Yeah.
8th. But they can pre order it now, like you said. And
Yeah.
we have some good pre order bonuses, which I'm going to try to spend the rest of the day finalizing and sending out to people who've already pre ordered. But
Mhm.
they can get it at stickyhabitsbook.com. And habit there is plural. So stickyhabitsbook.com. There are no hyphens or anything. Yeah, I would love if they could pre order it. It helps a lot.
Yeah. Really learned a lot about that from, hearing how much pre-order helps support this
Hmm.
work. So I will include that there and encourage you all to pre-order this book. But before we wrap up, I have a couple questions that I like to ask each
Yeah.
guest. Mm. The first one is, what is one habit or practice that's making the biggest difference in your life right now?
This is so boring. It's so boring, but it's getting ready for bed as soon as I can at night. And again, you've heard I struggle with sleep. It's been a long-standing issue, but if my days go better when I wake up earlier with my family. That's just our time of life. I actually hate waking up early like I have to. But the thing that makes all of it easier is going to bed. So getting ready for bed even sooner than I want to or feel like has been like that all goes back to that for me.
I love that. I feel the same. What is something you're currently learning or noticing about yourself in this season of life?
Mhm. This has been another one of those series of moments realization for me, and it really started, uh, last fall when I went on my first trip by myself on a Pride and Prejudice pilgrimage. It was so amazing, but I felt equal parts joy and grief on that trip, and I realized
Mm.
that there were still a lot of parts of me that were getting lost to my responsibilities. It was kind of like a period where I had to recalibrate a bit and notice, like,
Yeah.
I need more rest. I need more adventure. They seem counterproductive, but to me, I
Mhm.
needed both, and I need more hobbies. So I've been working on exploring hobbies in particular this year, and it's been really, really helpful. But also another way for me, I'm learning so much about habits and hobbies, actually, and more about myself too.
Yeah, I love that. I'm loving your hobby journey and love following along on that.
Oh, good.
And so, lastly, is what does loving your real life look like for you?
hmm It's having small moments that are absent of any responsibility or to do or pressure, where it's just about me making time for something I'm interested in, whether it's
Mm.
reading a book or fiddling in my garden, um, or even doing something a little bigger, like this podcast that we're on today. So having a moment that
Yeah.
feels like mine.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Monica. Anything else you want to share before we wrap this up?
Um, we already talked about the pre-order. I would say actually, if they like what I had to say here, come and listen to my podcast. Just search for About
Yeah.
Progress in that app you're already in, and listen in. And we talk a lot about habits, identity, fulfillment. Interview a lot of great people, and I'd love to have them there.
Yes, I will share all your links, and I love your podcast. That's how I first learned about you, was listening, and I am a avid listener for sure.
Thank you. That's a thrill, honestly, a thrill for me. So thank you, and thanks for having me too, Faith. It's been such a great conversation, and I appreciate the heart that you poured into it and the preparation that you put into it as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Monica, and I wish you the best in your pre-order and can't wait to hear and read your book.
Thank you.
All right. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much for listening to the Love Your Real Life podcast. I hope that today's episode was just what you needed. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you're looking for more support, check out the show notes for how to connect. Remember, no matter what your story holds, you are worthy of living a life that you love. Talk to you soon.